Greetings and welcome to my first YouTube video in a little while. Okay, so today's video is going to be more of a theory type thing because I've actually been questioning this for a few hours now. So, bushfires. They occur practically every summer and it makes me wonder about the rules with learners whom are allowed to drive in Victoria with a supervising driver, and how would the law change in a bushfire and how would that law look? Okay. So, a little bit of a newsflash. Okay, so learner drivers in Victoria have to have a learner driver supervisor with them. So it has to be either a parent or a guardian. And we log it on an app called the My Learners app, which is for us to get our Ps. And for that period of 120 hours, we need to have someone next to us at all times when we drive. Now, bushfires, when it comes to them, it's kind of chaotic. But I found myself today thinking about something that I hadn't really considered before. In consolidation, if you probably haven't seen the news recently, there are bushfires in Europe going on, in France, the UK, and Spain, and whatever. And what Victoria has seen in the past with our bushfires, such as the 2023 to 2024 Grampians bushfires, the Black Summer fires of 2019, and of course the Longwood fires of this year, which is 2026. It's one of those really specific what-if situations, I do admit, and it's a scenario that probably sounds random at first, but the more I thought about it, it became more curious. So I decided to research more or less, and me being the knowledgeable type, I decided to put a paragraph into the Google search bar, which turned out like this. If a bushfire evacuation order is put in place, can a Victorian learner driver with hypothetically over 60 hours of driving experience drive a separate car if they are following all the road rules, staying in between their parents who are driving separate cars, mobile reception has been lost, there are no emergency services nearby, and one car is full of belongings, and the other one has got emergency supplies such as camping gear to consolidate for sleeping purposes, food, water, chargeables, and of course a first aid kit. And the parents trust that learner driver to stay in between them the whole way. So basically what I was saying is just then was a car's here, and you've got the learner in the middle, roughly about here. And for the entire drive, you've got the learner in the middle until they reach safety. I know. That was a very specific question, and I over-exaggerated it and over-explained. But I was also generally curious because bushfires are something we commonly deal with in Australia in summer, or unless you count the 3 years where we had an El Niño, which is absolutely downpouring of rain. Currently we are experiencing El Niño weather conditions, which is kind of chaotic, which means that we might end up having another bushfire season such as what we experienced in 2020, which I do admit was a very devastating bushfire. Condolences are going to the people who have suffered in the Black Summer bushfires and the people who suffered in the Grampians fires last year. So I did get curious, and people are always told with regards to evacuation orders that if you do get given one, you leave. You need to leave straight away. So I wanted to know how the law would actually treat a situation like this with regards to a learner driver being put in that situation of having to drive a car to get away from a bushfire in a life-threatening or evacuation situation. So I ended up searching up about it, and technically, under Victorian's government laws, it is technically no. You cannot drive without a supervising driver, no matter the situation, because technically you are inexperienced and you do not know. So myself, I cannot legally drive on my own. because I need someone next to me. And it doesn't matter if they have completed more than 60 hours or more than 100, or they've got all 120 and they haven't got their P's. You still have to have a supervising driver with you. It also doesn't matter if the parents are driving in front or behind in that situation, apparently, which I think is very stupid. But it also doesn't matter if the person telling is the parents. So parents, technically, they are your authority figures. But when it comes to driving, they're not. So if they say to you, can you drive the car in between us on the way to an evacuation safe site, you cannot do that. Confusing, I know. Now, Victorian law does require a fully licensed supervising driver to be sitting in the front passenger seat of a learner's vehicle. So in Australia, we drive on the right, or the left-hand side. So our steering wheel is on the right. So if you're watching this in America, well, you drive on the left with your steering wheel on the left-hand side, and you go on opposite sides of the road. Australia is different. So we drive on the left, and you guys drive on the right. Confusing, I know. But without a supervisor beside them, it's considered unsupervised driving, which is technically illegal. Now, for someone who's taken legal studies as well, I do know some of the rules with regards to that. Now, that part does actually make complete sense, which is true. The supervision rule exists for a reason, as people who are learning to drive have never experienced what it's like to be behind the wheel of a motor vehicle, and they are basically driving a motorized weapon. I know, tragic and very sad. Learners, technically, are still developing their skills. Having an experienced driver makes both themselves safer, the experienced driver safer, and the road safer for not only themselves but other patrons who do use the road. So I do completely understand why that rule exists. But I do also note that I did continue to read, and this is where things do get confusing. So from what I saw, Google did go on to explain that if the situation became immediately life-threatening, emergency situations where following a normal legal requirement wasn't realistically possible and delaying the cost of lives, then preserving life becomes more practical as a priority than administrative traffic laws. I know, crazy, right? Yeah. So that's when I stopped and cogged it in my brain. Mainly due to, if an evacuation order is issued, authorities are literally telling people to leave. So in a way, they're telling you to pack up and get out of your house. Get out of your house as soon as urgently possible, because it is a situation where you are at risk. You are basically in that situation where you are practically going to risk your life, which I do admit is kind of, well, a situation. But yeah, but authorities are telling people to leave because that is the safest thing to do at the time, because an evacuation is before things get really catastrophic, such as being too late to leave. Now, but according to a law, if a learner driver has to drive another vehicle because there isn't enough room for everyone, they're still not legally allowed to drive without a supervising driver seen beside them. I think personally that rule is kind of bullshit in a emergency situation. Like, for example, if someone ends up having a heart attack and you're on your learners and no one else is around and you have no way of calling 000 in time because they're at risk of dying and there's a hospital like 10 minutes down the road, what are you going to do? Get in that car and fucking drive. You are going to drive. Even if they are unable to physically tell you where to turn, you are going to drive. And it basically begs the question, of this situation and this topic I'm discussing. But it does also reiterate with the obeyance of the evacuation order. If you do obey it early, it is technically still illegal. But in the sense, it is kind of obvious that it is illegal because there's no immediate life-threatening injury or situation. Now, with Australia being full of bushland on the east coast and west coast, it's kind of rapid. But if you wait until the fire arrives, it becomes an immediate threat to your life. Now, note, we have in Victoria, we have Vic Emergency. It is our emergency alert app, and I know Oz Alert just got tested a few days ago, and me personally, I prefer Vic Emergency, but in the sense it is also a good thing to have Oz Alert as well. Vic Emergency has 4 key parts to it. It has a watch and act, prepare, evacuate, and too late to leave system. It's the same for flooding and cyclones, well, which Victoria doesn't get cyclones because we're in the south, we're not in Queensland. So basically that's how the system works. And with that comes the situation of having Australians deal with needing to look at Vic Emergency to judge whether it's safe to leave as well. But we do also have the ABC, which does also do emergency broadcasts with an alert system to tell you whether it's safe to leave or not. But enough about that. To continue on, that's when people start talking about necessity, preserving life, and emergency circumstances. And this gets me really confused, partially, as well. Mainly due to, as well, the law doesn't suddenly change. It doesn't. It is written in a book called the Constitution. For anyone who lives in Australia, you would know about the Constitution, and you would also know about the individual state laws. However, because it doesn't, the law still does say that learners must have a supervising driver. I know, crazy, right? But in an extreme emergency, there may be legal principles that recognise someone acted to save lives rather than simply break the rules. And there are 2 completely different things with that, which is understandable. One is what the law says you're supposed to do. The other is how the legal system might look at someone's actions after an extraordinary emergency. Me personally, I understand the difference. But from an everyday person's perspective, it can sound contradictory. Because on one hand, we're told if authorities tell you to evacuate, you leave early. But then if every available seat is taken and the only remaining person capable of driving is a learner, the law says they can't drive alone. Still. That also makes me wonder, wouldn't it be safer if families could get everyone moving before conditions became life-threatening? Yeah, I know. Kind of smart, isn't it? Yeah. Wouldn't leaving earlier reduce the risk overall? Well, obviously there are reasons that learner laws do exist, but the risk involved would be, with regards to leaving earlier, is that you do get out of the area safer and quicker, and you have a higher chance of being more safe. Because Australian bushfires can go from being a small little campfire to doing this. And it's taken up half the fucking bush. And we all know all too well that the fucking bush is somewhat flammable, with leaves of gum or gum leaves and sticks from the gum leaves being key fuel when bushfires do start. Okay? They're often the laws are there to protect inexperienced drivers and everyone else on the road, which is a given. And I'm definitely not suggesting that learners should be allowed to drive unsupervised whenever they feel like it. Not at all. I'm talking about an incredibly rare situation. Like, incredibly rare. Like, full-on, hypothetical, rare type thing. Okay, so I want you all to imagine that your communications have gone. Your phone has lost its reception, right? You've lost your reception to your phone. You aren't able to make any phone calls. And you're not able to call 000. Okay? There are no police nearby. No fireys, because fireys are fighting the fire. And there are no ambulance, and the SES are doing recovery. And a bushfire, let's say, for example, one is sparked in Kuirup. And you are stuck in that situation where you've got a son or daughter who is a learner driver, and you've got a car full of safety equipment and a car full of personal belongings. One vehicle is all ready to go, the other vehicle is ready to go as well. And there is enough room to fit the rest of your family, such as extended siblings, like brothers or sisters or step-siblings. The parents know the son or daughter's learning ability and how well they can drive because they sit next to them on a regular when they drive. And so basically they trust them completely and tell them to stay between both cars. Even then, the law still says no. And that's the part I find interesting, and you might as well find interesting. Because it shows the difference between laws that are written for normal everyday conditions and the reality of disasters where people sometimes have to make impossible decisions in a matter of minutes, because minutes are vital when leaving a bushfire-prone area. You can never know where a bushfire is going to start, if the embers are going to start little spot fires, and vice versa. It's basically a level of knowing that, well, it's going to cause more devastation if the family cannot get out in time. Okay? For example, take a look at past Victorian bushfires, and before I do go into this topic, I do want to consolidate this issue. I do note that this is going to trigger some horrible memories for people, and I'm deeply sorry and feel bad for the people whom had and have lost everything to these fires, and to them I do say I am extremely sorry if this is a touchy part of the video. Take some of the following bushfires, for example. The Black Summer bushfires of 2019 to 2020. Millions of hectares across Australia was burnt. Thousands of people's homes were gradually destroyed over the course of it, and entire communities were evacuated. And one community that we know of very well in Victoria was Malakuta. Now, Malakuta is on the coast of Victoria, up north, right near the border for Queensland. Not for Queensland, for New South Wales. And they were absolutely bombshelled with bushfires. They got absolutely gutted. I do note they did get gutted. People were evacuating via boats because it was too late for them to leave. You could see the smoke coming over Malakuta and everything, and it was basically everyone's worst nightmare because it was pitch black, according to what I've seen on news in the past. It has caused immense trauma for them. Roads for them were closed. Power and communication was lost in many places, and people were forced to make life-changing decisions in minutes, not hours. Like I said before, you only have minutes to make a decision with bushfires. Emergency services repetitively told people one thing: leave early. Now, when you get told to leave early, you leave. Unless you are willing to fight for your property. If you have... Some houses have fire deterrent systems, which is sprinklers on the roof that protect the house, but they don't. But there are some houses that can have failures. Not when you can see flames. You do not leave when you see flames, because it is too late to leave. Everyone in Australia knows that. However, not when smoke is surrounding your home either. Leave before conditions become catastrophic, because once a bushfire reaches a certain point, it is simply too dangerous to escape. Another example is the 2023 to 2024 Grampians bushfires here in Victoria. Now, this is a very cautious one. Okay, so the Grampians are a national park. It is accommodating for tourism in Halls Gap and the surrounding communities. I went to Halls Gap in between those fires when they were extinguished, and I do admit it was very devastating to see that everyone was evacuated and they had to shut down businesses and hope that their businesses weren't shut down, because Halls Gap relies heavily on tourism to fund its stores. And even then, families were absolutely devastated because Halls Gap is in a valley between the Grampians. Because Halls Gap is basically there's a dip in the mountains, and Halls Gap is in that dip. So if they didn't get control of the fire and try to help extinguish it, it would have engulfed Halls Gap. I do admit, I'm glad it didn't. I'm glad Halls Gap wasn't flattened, because Halls Gap is a very nice area and they have no reception. So they would have had a very hard time getting in contact with anyone to say, hey, we're in the path of a fire, we need to evacuate. Okay, so those fires burned for weeks, destroyed homes and forced evacuations across multiple communities, including Halls Gap. And once again, everyone was reminded how quickly bushfires can change direction depending on wind and weather. It doesn't matter if your house is okay, is fireproof or anything, your house can still burn down. If you have windows open or air conditioner going, embers can fly through and cause your house to light from the inside. It is very scary for bushfire ravaged victims. Communities were also told to prepare in advance and leave early if they intended to evacuate, because it can be deadly if you wait till the last minute. It can be catastrophic. It can be life or death. Okay, so more recently, the Longwood fires. In January 2026, Victoria experienced some of its worst fire conditions since Black Summer. I do note, I could see the smoke from where I am. It is catastrophic. Emergency Victoria did warn of catastrophic and extreme fire danger ratings, which meant fires could spread rapidly and unpredictably. So basically, our system in Australia, or more or less Victoria, is a system where it has moderate, or low, moderate, extreme, catastrophic. If it hits extreme, it means that there is the risk of a fire being prominent. If it hits catastrophic, then there are prime conditions for a bushfire. So that means that there's enough wind, enough fuel on the ground, or ignite fuel, and there is also enough ignition to keep the fire alive. And so with that also does include the interpretation of Oslo as well, which is coming into effect in October. People were repetitively told leaving early is the safest option, while also warning that once an emergency warning changed to take shelter now, it was often too late to leave safely. Basically, majority of Longwood was burnt down, I do admit. The bushfire area, it got as far as Alexandra. I'm pretty sure Alexandra was one of the communities that was ravaged. There were fires all the way in Horsham as well, like grass fires in Horsham. There was some near the border for Albury as well, and it basically was all around the state. It basically reminded some people of what Black Saturday looked like. Now, Black Saturday was devastating for everyone, I know, even though I was not even a week old. I was about a week old when it started, and I do admit I have done research on it, and it was one of the most devastating. Ash Wednesday was another one. And that is why this hypothetical interested me. Emergency services are consistently encouraging people to evacuate before the situation becomes critical. The whole idea is to avoid making the impossible decisions when a fire is already at your doorstep, knocking on your door saying, "Hey, I've got a pie, do you want a pie?" So imagine this hypothetical situation, okay? So, welcome to regional Victoria. It's farms on your left and your right. You got a little country town, and you got little convenience stores, like you got a little grocery store, a little Bunnings and everything. Like, it's a small town with a population of about 500 people to about not even 1,000. Okay? An evacuation order was issued, and your family is living in regional Victoria. And you have 3 cars on your property. So let's just say you've got one car is a 4-wheel drive with a canopy, the other one is a small hatchback, and the other one is another small hatchback. Okay? One vehicle is already packed with emergency supplies because you checked the weather prior and you knew that there was going to be an increased fire risk, so you packed early. Okay? And this vehicle has emergency supplies such as food, medications, important documents, and first aid kits, because you will need those if you're going to survive, along with camping equipment. Another vehicle is carrying larger belongings that couldn't fit anywhere else. Okay, so it's basically packed to the back seat, like the back seat is full on both cars. And the third vehicle has some family members in it, such as yourself and your brother and your grandmother and your grandfather, for example. Okay? Everyone is trying to leave early, exactly as the emergency authorities recommend, right? Okay? But then you realize that the person, or yourself, you are not old enough to, But then you realize that there aren't enough learner drivers, or legalized drivers, to move every vehicle while keeping it together, and only one person remains who knows how to drive is the learner. The parents trust them. You're not planning on speeding. You're not planning on taking risks. You're simply going to drive between the 2 licensed drivers all the way to the evacuation point. Legally, the answer is still no. Shocking. Victorian learner license rules still require a fully licensed driver to be sitting in the front passenger seat. Okay, so the grandparents probably don't have their license anymore because they decided to not renew it, which is a given because they probably don't want to drive anymore because it's changed. Okay? The fact is that an evacuation doesn't automatically create an exception. That's true. And that's where I found this whole situation fascinating and concerning. Because emergency management does also note that leaving early gives you the best chance of survival. The road law says the learner can't drive on their own. I know. But then when the emergency becomes so severe that someone's life is generally in immediate danger, lawyers sometimes talk about the doctrine of necessity. Now, if you don't know what the doctrine of necessity is, it is the law on which, if a situation was necessary and there was no one else to drive, then the person who can drive drives. So in that case, a learner, if there was a situation where someone was stuck and there wasn't enough people to drive, the learner would take control of the third car. Okay? A legal principle that may be considered if someone's actions are later examined by a court. So if the police do pull over the learner driver for driving without a supervisor and they have subsequent evidence, but the police still say to them, go to court, there's the evidence to prove that you were driving without a licensed driver, but there was a reason behind it, which is a given. Notice that's not the same thing as saying the law suddenly changes. It does not. The supervision law requirement still applies. The difference is that in extraordinary life-threatening emergency, the legal system may consider why someone acted the way they did. For example, like I said before, a heart attack. If a family member's having a heart attack, you're the only one that can drive because there's no self-service or the other people are out busy. How are you going to get them to the hospital if 000 is down? Which has happened quite a lot recently. But we're not going to go into that because 000 is our emergency contact. And in the end, it is also how we also get around with emergencies such as that and reporting such emergencies. Okay? It's a really important distinction. To me, though, it still raises an interesting public policy question. If emergency services spend years encouraging people to leave before conditions become catastrophic, should there also be a very narrowly defined emergency provision for learner drivers in exceptional circumstances? I'm not saying every learner driver should be allowed to drive unsupervised, far from it, because it's illegal. The supervision rules save lives and makes our roads safer every single day. That is true. Okay? I'm talking about the incredibly rare scenario where communications are gone, emergency services aren't available, evacuation is urgently recommended, and there genuinely isn't another practical option. Should the law remain exactly how it is? Or should there be a tightly controlled emergency exception for disasters like major bushfires? Maybe the law is exactly how it should be. Maybe there are safety risks that outweigh potential benefits. Maybe there are legal reasons I haven't considered. Or maybe it's one of those grey areas where there simply isn't a perfect answer. We don't know. And I personally don't know. Because in the end, I'm just a legal stage student in high school. And I'm basically just a learner driver as well. So, yeah. But at the same time, it is also kind of questionable on how the law changes for that. Either way, I found it fascinating, which is true, because I am heavily indulged in this topic since I'm making this video, because it's not something most people ever think about until they imagine themselves in that situation. I know. But it also begs the idea of, in such situations, how someone such as everyday teens, whom can legally drive, have that consolidation in this hypothetical scenario to have legal leeway if there is an emergency risk. So I'm curious, what do you think? Should learner driver laws remain exactly the same, even during large-scale emergencies? Or do you think they should be narrowly defined as an emergency exception for situations where evacuation is genuinely necessary and there is no practical alternative? I genuinely love to hear your perspectives on this. And so, this is complete, and just before the comments, this is completely hypothetical. Okay? I do not actually have 60 hours of driving experience. I'm not asking for legal advice, encouraging anyone to break the law, or saying this is something people should do. I simply researched the question out of curiosity and thought the answer raised interesting discussion points about the balance between road safety laws and emergency situations. I do also note that there is no way of changing the law unless it gets put into a petition, but it is also based on laws in each state. Like, no law is the same. For example, in New South Wales, the law's different. Queensland, the law's different. Northern Territory, it's different. Western Australia, it's different. South Australia, it's different. And Tasmania, it's different. No one state has the same law. Like, for example, in every state in Australia, other than Victoria, you can be 17 and get your Ps. Victoria, you have to be 18. And you have to be on your Ps for 1 year. And then you go onto your green Ps for 3 years. So in total you get 4 years of driving by yourself. At the same time, in New South Wales, you cannot go above 110 kilometres per hour, which is understandable because they have trust issues over there. To also note as well, it is kind of chaotic as well, in the sense with that. I also do know that laws do change over the course of different situations, like the learner books is getting probably updated next year, so laws can change with regards to learners. I will probably end up having to proofread it myself, and as well, before I actually go and do my driving, because I am 17, I do get my Ps next year, but it will be good to just overlook the book when I get my Ps in order to see what laws have changed. But at the same time, it is also my decision with regards to reviewing the book. Parents have different points of views. Like, there are some parents who let their kids on private property drive cars around on private property with consolidation on that. That is awesome. I am very grateful for those kids. Those kids are fucking lucky. I do admit that there are some parents who are very controlling with regards to it and say that you're not allowed to touch a car. I wash the car. I need to move the car onto the lawn. I do so without leaving the property. I just have a cutout in my driveway that I use to get to the lawn, and yeah, and it's still on the property. I just wash the car and then put it back where I got it from, going via that cutout again. It varies depending on how your parents see your driving capability. Like, my parents trust me to move Swift into one spot without going on the road. And there are some parents who would just say to them, wash the car on the pavers or driveway or whatever. And it's different for every household. And I do admit, private property, the law doesn't apply on private property, but there is also that consolidation as well. You do not break the laws on the road. You need to have a supervising driver with you at all times when you're driving to get your hours up. But in that emergency situation, I think it should be legal to drive in between the parents if there is a life-threatening situation involved. But that's just my personal opinion. And on behalf of that, I'm going to end this video here. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this gave some form of informativeness on how I think bushfires and learners should be handled. More or less, I'm not an expert. I'm just going to say that now. I'm not an expert. I'm raising my hands for that. I'm not. Okay? I'm just a regular 17-year-old Australian teenager who basically had that question in their head, that wanted to know what it would be like. And so I'm going to end it here. I hope you enjoyed, and if you do, consider giving the video a like. I don't want to over accentuate that because I'm not going to be like one of those YouTubers who begs for likes, like. But I'm just going to say, if you want to, you can like the video. It's your choice. I'm going to give you that decision. And if you want to also subscribe, that is completely your decision. I'm not going to force you. But do note that this is all just a hypothetical. I don't want anyone to thus break the law and think that it gives them a free run to light a bushfire and then claim it was a emergency situation. You do still need to provide proof that it was an emergency situation if it does go to court. Okay, so I'm going to end the video here, and I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I continue making videos like this. Adios.